Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming along. The title, when you put in an abstract, you think you're going to do something, then you go back and revisit the title you gave your talk, and you think, that was interesting. And it's the title that I started off with for this presentation today was Care as a Foundation for Design Practice and Exploring New Contexts for Health and Wellbeing, which seems somewhat grand and challenging. But what it really is what I'm going to talk about today, is the relationship between design, health and wellbeing under a premise of care. And I'll explain why and how as I go through the talk. Design and health is a really big international moment in time. There's a lot of talk about it, a lot of interest in it, and we can see it through a range of... which one are we using? Great, thank you. Yep. So we can see it in websites. It's quite easy. This is a very lazy, just Google image search, looking at the ways in which design and wellbeing or health is being presented. A few weeks ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to this exhibition at the Wellcome Institute in London on the Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? Possibly, if they get the labels wrong on the machine they're using, it might be a problem. But what was interesting when I went through this exhibition and was looking at the kind of work that was being presented, it moves between packaging, campaigns for public health, a lot of digital interventions to help you learn more about health and wellbeing. And it's very much, I suppose, in what we would expect design to be and what we would expect graphic design to be. Yeah, I agree. Around what the intersection of design and health is. But I want us to think a bit more broadly and conceptually than that. We also, if you can equally do a quite simple search to look at design and wellbeing, and you start to see quite a lot of similar kind of imageries and propositions being put out there now about what it is to have wellbeing, what it in that same way, and what the design intersections are. And I think that these are all good, interesting, valid ways of going about stuff. Now I want to go back to PowerPoint. There we go. I'm sorry. That's all right. I've done it. You got it. Amazingly, I've done it. The first academic paper I ever did was from novice to Luddite. Or Luddite to novice, one of those, and I haven't changed. So the thinking that's informing, this proposition about what is wellbeing, and as Sarah was talking about, we've been involved in a project with Bendigo Hospital on framed as design as wellbeing, about how did they go from just having a hospital, and we're particularly focusing on the psychiatric unit in our work in that hospital, although it's a whole hospital redo, which is a grand project. But we're particularly looking at how do they go from a building and a series of sites, somewhat like this, very nice building, to a brand new superstructure is what you can almost call it. It's an amazing building to go to. One of our colleagues recently had to take his child there, and he took photographs of the interior that had the same sense of space and quite overwhelming in some ways that I've taken while we've been there on sites and visits. But what's been very interesting is looking at it through, and what we're doing is we're going through to make sense of how have the design of this new facility, how has it impacted, or how do the various stakeholders of a hospital experience the new space compared to the old space? And so therefore we might have some learnings about the design that was done by the architects, designers, landscape people. And that's been my particular focus, is looking at what have been the intentions of the designers in the various forms in the design of the space and how they went about it. But when we think about wellbeing and mental health, it's interesting, and I was looking up this as part of the preparation, is the World Health Organisation positions mental health as in this sort of framework. It's a state of well-being in which every individual realises their own potential, copes with the stresses of life, works productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. How do you design into that ambition? I think that that's the thing that's quite overwhelming when you really think about it, that the people who've been trying to build the experience of the space where the services will take place, the care will happen, are also contributing to such a huge ambition that it will be so systemic in a person's life. So this is what brought me to the idea of care. And so last year we held, I think it was last year, it might have been the year before, they all come to being one eventually. We hosted a one-day symposium looking at the intersections between designing future cities of care, which has transformed to become designing future cultures of care, and it's actually a book that will be out next year. But as we were working through this, the care was the thing that came to the prevalence to me, or to be prominent, as a result of talking to the architects and the designers. Because how do you take a way of thinking about caring for people through your practices so that they will help to realise these big ambitions? Those who are in the area of design will know that empathy has been the conversation du jour. It's been a big area of concern, particularly in the digital technologies. How do we actually create empathy when we're designing experiences? But also it's existed for a long time in product, graphic, and also spatial design. How do we actually build this interconnection? And what I'm kind of thinking about here is when you look at that bottom left-hand black square, it says empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another. And as you can see, there's lots of touching and lots of interconnectivity. As I've been doing the work that around this book and the thinking that's going to it, is I've been looking a lot at the work of care ethicists and what they bring to how we might think about an ethics of care. And Maurice Hamilton has been particularly strong in my thinking in this space. And the proposition that's made by care ethicists is that empathy is passive. I can have empathy for you. I can have a sense of how your pain is, your illness, your ailment, your challenge. But I don't actually have to do anything beyond that. I can empathise with you, but I don't have to act. And I think that that's actually a really important point, especially for a designer. And so what the care ethicist and Hamilton puts forward is that care is active. So if we move from empathy to care, we go from being passive to active in what we're doing and how we might actually then perform or practice care to another. So he goes on to then state the following, which is a very long quote, and I'm sorry about it, but I think he sums up what he's saying better than I can sum him up. But it's these things about it's ethically meaningful. It's actualised through performance. Caregivers must do something for others. Caring integrates a disposition of openness and positive intentions for the performance of actions that lead to a flourishing. So if we go back to the World Health Organisation about how might we enable through the design of a space for people to have that quality of life, it is not enough that I design with empathy. I actually have to do something that transitions into this care informed by empathy or engaged with empathy. And so, as we were talking with the designers, these are some of the hospital shots of the old hospital. It's interesting to think how when they're conceiving of the space and how people will experience it, how are they working from this to this, which is the interior of the new hospital, before you go into these black shots. So what Hamilton says is that caring design is a human-centred innovation and problem-solving methodology process, as well as a moral and epistemological ideal, rather than the commitment to inquiry, empathy and care for constituent stakeholders. His particular life of and he makes a proposition in this particular paper that there is a line between, there's a real need in terms of organisations for there to be design plus care in order to evolve those cultures. But his interpretation of design is design thinking, which is a really limited understanding of what design is. Because anybody who's a designer knows that design is equally problem-making. Design is iterative, but that doesn't mean there's a solution. It means we choose to stop because of various requirements. Design happens within a multitude of stakeholders where the designer is negotiating quite complex needs and expectations and has to do this iterative process with these intersections. So I think his proposition is good, but I think it's limited. So I've been playing around with the definition, whereas design as a practice of care is an approach to innovation and the realisation of design interventions that have a moral and epistemological ideal, grounded in a commitment to inquiry, empathy, care of constituent stakeholders. And I have deliberately taken out human-centred, because I think that is also one of the big problems of empathy. Because designers actually have to work within larger living and material systems. We have to think about the environment, we have to think about all living beings, not just people. Design has become terribly human-centric in the way it's thought about itself over the last 10 years. And so what I've been trying to think about, and the proposition of the book, is that we can actually expand and understand that design does this. Design does help with our understanding of our packaging, our graphics, any sort of nice way that will help people to be able to engage in a design understanding. We can see it through a whole range of products, however we might think about design. But in the design for, I'm going really, really quickly. You'll love me, Bianca. Is that in the book, what we've been looking at is how can we expand this proposition of care and design and a cultural practice. And the culture means both culture, high culture. Culture means community to a broader way of thinking about practices. And so the chapters and the contributions to the book come from around the world. A number of them are in the areas where we might expect to see the intersections between design and care and health and aged communities, because that is the other area at the moment that there is a massive amount of work taking place. So I've got in the book there's 2 chapters. One's looking at a participatory co-design community facilitation method in Northern England. Another one is in Hong Kong and China, and looking at the different cultural dimensions of that. We have people looking at a city of literature as a way of thinking about care and well-being for the cultural life of a place and its artefacts. This project here is, this image behind me is from a project by Brad Haylock and students here in the Master of Communication Design, where they were working with the Sentencing Advisory Committee, a board, who wanted to be able to convey the data about who gets sentenced for what, to understand the implications of crime, so that people can understand what might happen to them and the bigger picture. So they've been doing a number of pieces around projects looking at information design and taking that sort of thing down to mobile devices. So this is an act of care, but it's quite a different, bigger notion of care and well-being for a society and a community. That group have also been doing work with ACME around our artefacts of their archive for the moving image. And this is a project that's included in it because here they're talking about and looking at diversity as a context for well-being, which we could definitely see in the current news stories, that this is something that we need to think about. Care and well-being is well outside just our health contexts. And this is a project that comes from, and this is a model for a project that, this was something that informed the design of a project that's actually in far north Norway. And it's, here the group of researchers of Andrew Morrison and co from Oslo have been looking at how they can enliven a community in a very remote area through design. So it's adding to the well-being of a community by looking at the redesign of a facility and the services therein. And they had their launch last week of it there and with all of its items. So what I'm really proposing in this presentation is that we actually expand our understanding of care and well-being and what design can do. And it's design as thing, but design as it's also about our disposition as designers. It's about how we think about practice. And this is what the ethics, the care, practice care as a practice, get your words right, Laurene, care as a practice is put forward by care ethicists. Because one of the things is that it's always evolving like any practice. It is not a thing. And that's one of the things that's really quite interesting, I suppose, and I'm putting forward here, is that design is both a noun and a verb. Design is a thing. It's a package, it's a service, it's a building. But design is also a verb. It's a way of doing things. Care can be a thing a noun, a thing I do, and with boundaries, aged care, child care. But care is also a practice. It is a way of being in action. And so that is really the proposition. If we're thinking about design and well-being, there is actually something more about the people and how we're doing it and the systems we create that we need to consider. So thank you.